I have your notebook. You're gonna take notes. Share jointly, as we usually do.
Well, usually it's my name,
You want to put your name? Did you register?
but you can change the name.
I can. Go ahead and do it. Okay, I can show your face too. Say hello.
We'll give people a couple more minutes to sign on.
See ya. Bye. Have a great day.
We have a small group today so far. I wonder if people are on vacation or.
Could also be first day of school type of thing too, where people are just getting ready to take their kids to school.
Yeah, or.
People using Zoom for school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Assisting kids with virtual classrooms.
Although there's enough of us older people. It's like, I don't know, we don't have an excuse.
I don't know. These days, I think everyone has an excuse to just, take a day off or a morning off.
Well, I did forget, like, in the beginning of the COVID thing a few times to show up. So it was like, today's a good day for that.
Hey, we're getting some weird feedback. So if you can mute your microphones, we are going to get started in just a minute.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Okay. So we may get more people as we get into the presentation, but I do want to get started. So welcome. I'm just going to go through and call out the names that I see. And if I don't call your name, let me know so I can record you for the attendance list. So I have Valerie Dean from DOT, Martin Daly, CDRPC, Rogerio and Teresa from CMPEC, Linda Vonderheide from Rensselaer County, Jeanette from Bike at Toga, Jennifer Hogan from Department of Health, Jordan Solano Reed from CDTC, Meg O'Leary from Saratoga County Department of Health, Austin Zhang. Austin, are you also with the the student group, or? I think he is. John Mitchell from Half Moon, Lindsay Garney from CETA, John Gillivan from Albany Bike Coalition and Village of Colony, and then I see Zach Powell from the City of Albany. Did I miss anyone? Okay, so welcome. This is, I don't know how many, let's see, April, May, June, July, August. This is our 6th, the Zoom meeting. So I think everyone knows the rules and the etiquette to our virtual meetings by now, but just as a reminder, if you're not talking, if you can mute your microphone, I have no problem with people, chiming in, but just try not to talk over other people. This is being recorded and live streamed to our CDTC YouTube channel. And you do not have to use your camera if you don't want to. So today we're going to start with a presentation on green infrastructure. This is something that we've talked about quite a bit and talked about how we can incorporate green infrastructure into bicycle and pedestrian projects. I always see bicycle and pedestrian projects as a good place to start incorporating green infrastructure. Martin Daly at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission has a lot of experience auditing municipal codes and helping local governments implement green infrastructure through his project, the CSO. I'll let Martin explain exactly what he does. As we say, it's hard to explain. I'll let Martin explain that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, hopefully. And Martin, I think I have to make you a host. So I'm going to do that. And then if you can share your screen, and then when you're done, make me the host again, okay?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jen, for the introduction. As most of you know, Jen knows me pretty well. So my name is Martin Daly. I'm the Director of Water Quality Programs for the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. In that capacity, I apologize, my lighting is not great. So if I appear like I'm on the witness protection program or in 60, I apologize for that. But you don't want to see me, you want to see a presentation. So we'll move to that in a moment. In my capacity as Director of Water Quality Programs, I have 2 primary responsibilities. One is I work with 6 municipalities and 2 county sewer districts on joint administration of a regional combined sewer overflow management plan. Essentially what that means is the 6 communities have pledged to work together through a regulatory requirement and also through their permits in an intermunicipal agreement to essentially get combined sewage out of the Hudson River. And they're all sharing the cost in that. As a component of that program, there are some green infrastructure demonstration projects that were incorporated in, and I'm going to summarize some of those projects. I think that's the fun stuff people want to see. The second element of my work is we work with multiple communities throughout the region to provide them assistance through what's called, everything's an acronym, through our 604B water quality program. That's a federal grant that's passed through New York State DEC. And that gives us the opportunity to work with select municipalities in the region on water quality issues ranging from point source pollution to non-point source pollution. I'll talk a little bit about that. Protecting water quality at drinking water assets, and working with communities essentially to incorporate their stormwater management controls and get a better public outreach to the efforts that they're undertaking in their municipalities. So that's one of the more exciting programs we get to work with. So what I'd like to do today is walk you through some successful green infrastructure practices, some ways that communities have incorporated green infrastructure into their streetscape. I'll talk a little bit about the projects themselves, how they how they unfolded, some lessons learned. And then through my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about ways that communities can implement these projects themselves. So links to funding sources. By all means, I like to overstuff presentations. So I kind of think of it as a restaurant. You're gonna want to have a box to take home food. What I'll do is I'll archive this presentation on our website so you can go back to it. There's a lot of links in the presentation itself. So don't feel like you have to scribble your way through. And it's really meant to be a document that you can rely on to pass back to your municipality or advocates in your community who are interested in green infrastructure opportunities. So with that, let me go to share my screen, and I'm going to do that right now. Okay. Of course, when I do that, it covers up the controls. Can everybody see my screen here?
Yes.
My title slide. All right, awesome. So I'm going to jump into it. If you do have questions, jump in and ask me. I'm going to try to keep this sucker on time and be able to provide you with the opportunity to have a great meeting and try to summarize a lot of material quickly. But if you do want to jump in, please do so. So I did want to start how stormwater is regulated on the municipal level. This is important. Most communities in New York State have what's called permit coverage. They are allowed through their stormwater permit to discharge stormwater. It's like the ability to pollute comes with certain best management practices for each municipality. And so within the permit, there are what are called minimum control measures. And these minimum control measures are what put the legal requirements on a municipality to manage their stormwater and develop a set of criteria by which they enforce and provide oversight of stormwater activities, both in the public sector and private sector. And this is really important. For anybody interested in stormwater on a municipal level, communities that have permit coverage have a stormwater management plan in which they set their goals for the year. And each year they update that plan. And it's a really important document. And it's the best way to get an understanding of what your municipality's goals are and ways to align a bike and pedestrian project with your municipality's stormwater management goals. And this is a really critical step in the process. So I talk about management. There's a permit, which is on the far left side. That comes from the New York State DEC. The communities with permit coverage have a copy of their permit that's required to be posted. They'll incorporate stormwater management into their development review. They'll have a section of their municipal code specifically dedicated to stormwater management with certain provisions associated with it. And then they'll incorporate their stormwater management, if they're very progressive like the city of Albany, into the development review process. And that may dictate things like lot coverage, site design, landscaping, and those elements are really designed to encourage the private sector, to encourage and mandate the private sector to manage stormwater in a responsible way, because it all goes back to the permit. If the municipality is not enforcing the permit, they are in danger of violating state and federal environmental law. Let's talk a little bit about, let's dive into green infrastructure. So I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about how I'm diving into this. We have two kind of scales of green infrastructure. We have a city and county scale, and that may come to regional land use practices, preserving open space, preserving working farms, working to make sure on a regional scale we are preserving assets. And then on a neighborhood scale, where we're actually getting into the engineering or practices that mimic a natural process in order to manage stormwater. So there's actually two elements, and I'm going to talk about that second element, which is on a neighborhood scale, those engineered practices which work to naturally manage stormwater. There are a couple of different ways to look into this. There are separated systems. So most suburban municipalities have separated systems. That's where your stormwater goes into one pipe and your wastewater goes into a second pipe, and 100% of your wastewater is treated at a treatment plant. In these types of systems, you're more concerned about surface runoff because that surface runoff can carry anything, any of the pollutants that are on land. So for example, if you have a parking lot, like I do have behind me, when it rains, the stormwater can run off the parking lot into a storm drain, and that storm drain will discharge into a stream or creek, and it is not treated. And so municipalities are required through their permit to implement programs to do outfall inspection, to do public education, and to try to implement their stormwater programs so they're minimizing the amount of pollution that can enter that wastewater, to enter that water body. Then we have combined sewer systems. Older municipalities like the city of Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Waterford, Green Island goes. Most of your riverfront communities have combined sewer systems. And in this case, all the water that goes into the stormwater pipe, be it municipal sewage or your stormwater, is treated at the plant. And because during a wet weather event, there's so much stormwater that the plant can't possibly handle it, there are permitted overflows. So in this type of setup, the requirement is that communities implement their stormwater management program, but also they have good housekeeping practices as well. But in this case, quantity is more the driver for water quality. If you have a big storm event, that's going to create a bigger CSO. And so communities that are interested in green infrastructure and the non-point side may be looking at water quality benefits. And on the combined system side, they may be looking strictly at water volume benefits. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works in a little bit. How does green infrastructure work? As land becomes urbanized and developed, impervious surfaces create runoff. If water can't infiltrate back into the ground or get absorbed by plants, essentially it's going to run off and collect the pollutants as it goes. When we talk about green infrastructure, these are practices that can either evaporate the stormwater, can detain it, allow it to infiltrate back into the ground. And these are ways that really what we're doing is designing infrastructure that mimics nature. Gray infrastructure would be pipes and detention basins and manhole structures and storage. Green infrastructure really imitates nature. There are a lot of green infrastructure practices depending on the type of environment that you're looking to install a practice and what your ultimate stormwater goals are. Is it water quality? Is it detention based? Is it infiltration? But there are a number of different practices. I'm going to focus more on infiltration practices and what are called infiltration only and infiltration flow through. The other areas like green roofs, rain barrels and cisterns are more incorporated into the built environment. So I'm not going to talk about those so much, but I'll highlight some of these practices very quickly and give you an idea what they look like because they're more likely to be incorporated into a bike and pedestrian project. So how are green infrastructures practices designed? There's really a decision tree when an engineer or a planner selects a green infrastructure practice. They're going to want to start with the runoff reduction value for the site. If there's an area of the site that is impervious, how much stormwater is going to flow off. Then they're going to check soils to be able to determine if stormwater can percolate back through the ground. That provides them a whole range of infiltration practices. If not, there are certain measures, and I'll talk about those, about how they can select a stormwater practice that's going to fit the site. And then they can apply other green infrastructure practices to that particular site to be able to manage stormwater. It's a very basic way to look at designing stormwater for a particular site, but this is kind of the thought process when engineers are first going through that process of designing a green infrastructure practice to fit a particular site. And it doesn't mean you need an engineered green infrastructure practice. There are ways that communities can instantly hit the ground running by eliminating porous pavement, basically what we call disconnecting that stormwater generator or channeling an impervious area into something like a tree planting or a garden. There are simple ways to be able to manage stormwater without developing a fully engineered practice. So let's take a look at some green infrastructure practices. Most people are familiar with porous pavement, but just to summarize, it's a paving technique which creates void space in pavement. So we think of pavement as being very dense and completely impervious, but porous pavement is designed so the material that the aggregates that is used to create the pavement actually has airspace in it. And this is what water can drain through in areas of storms. And I'm going to see if my video isn't. Oh, my video is at the end. Okay. So here you can see an example, kind of a blow up, if you will, of what porous pavement might look like. And you can see it has a capacity to allow stormwater to infiltrate and then create some storage underneath. And there are several different types of actual products when you think about this. Not every type of porous pavement, you may describe it as tissues. Well, there's a Kleenex brand of porous pavement and different types of porous pavement out there, such as Stormcrete and Filter Pave, and they're all designed to a very specific capacity and operational use. So there are different types of porous pavement. It's not all the same stuff, but communities have a wide variety of options when it comes to looking at porous pavement. And really what this is going to do is it's going to mimic the built environment. So it's going to look like a driveway or a road or the area between the city strip and the street. And I'll talk a little bit about a community that's implemented porous pavement. So I have a video. Hopefully this works. You can kind of see this is a guy spraying a fire hose. onto porous pavement. And you can actually see, this is at Bard College, you'll be able to see how fast this porous pavement absorbs this water. Now this would, a stormwater event would never look like this, but you can see it's almost instantly drying when he's applying the stormwater, or he's applying the fire hose to it in a sense. But it's really just soaking up that stormwater and allowing it to infiltrate back into the ground. So it's not spreading pollutants in a point source sort of way into a water body. It's allowing them to filter back into the ground. There it is again. I don't know why it wants to do it twice. I must really like that video. Other practices may include an infiltration basin where runoff is going to go into a practice through a number of different ways, either through an inflow or runoff. In this particular practice, and a lot of the ones we have in a design manual that I'll link to at the end of the presentation have what's called an overflow. So it's kind of a belt and suspenders approach. If too much stormwater comes into the practice for it to handle, there's a kind of a relief valve in that sense. But really these practices are designed to infiltrate that stormwater back into the ground to prevent it from being discharged to a local water body or a stream where it's going to create the potential for pollution or contamination. There are a couple of other practices like infiltration trenches. These are again practices that absorb stormwater flow from a site. Water goes through traditionally gravel and sand to be able to provide some of that treatment capacity. There may be observation wells so you can check on to see how the practice is performing. But essentially these mimic nature, right? They get water back into the ground. There are also infiltration chambers and dry wells. These are a man-made engineered structure which has the capacity to store a lot of water. On the lower left, you'll actually see in Albany, this is at the Babe Ruth ball fields off of the New Scotland Pine Hills area. And these are a really neat practice because they dug up baseball fields. They buried these infiltration trenches, which allow stormwater to go back through them, and then they covered up the field again. And this provides an enormous amount of stormwater volume storage so that in a significant rain event, these will kind of fill up like a battery, and then they'll slowly either release the stormwater back into the ground or back into the combined system where it won't cause service backups. And the ball field is back over them. You'd never know they were there. They're actually creating a project to use some of that stormwater to be able to water the fields if they need to. But this is a neat practice that can be employed in an urban environment where you had, in this case, an area of traditionally quite severe flooding. Then I think a lot of people are familiar with rain gardens. Rain gardens are a really neat practice. They're more designed to infiltrate off of an already impervious surface. So they're more used in kind of a rural or lightly developed area because of that. So sometimes off of roofs as well. The real primary difference between a rain garden and what we call a bioswale is a rain garden is more designed less for treatment, but more for absorbing stormwater. Bioretention areas are more designed to accept stormwater flow where there might be pollution. It's picking up pollutants off an impervious surface or a rooftop, but essentially they work the same way. They're going to provide storage for stormwater. So these are a couple of different practices that municipalities have installed. Another bioretention example, this one is actually at the Wild Center in Lake Placid. It's really neat. It's in a parking lot. A lot of the parking lot is also porous pavement, but really what it's designed to do is accept sheet flow from the parking lot and allow it to percolate down, and they created a nice walking path through it. But if we're familiar with traditional parking lots, next time you go to a parking lot, it's kind of ridiculous. You'll see these parking islands surrounded in curbs. And so what developers have done is they've built a large parking lot. They've created a mechanism to channel stormwater into catch basins, and then they try to get the stormwater away. And then they have to go out and water the landscaping that's required in the parking lot islands. So the system right now, as many communities have designed them, just doesn't make any sense. In circumstances where they can do basically the opposite and allow water to flow into the practice, they can actually do some really dynamic things and relieve stresses on their stormwater management system. I talked about this briefly. A lot of these practices are summarized in what we call our Green Infrastructure Toolkit that was developed by Barton Lungjudas for communities in the pool communities, the 6 communities that we're working with. They're more focused on managing stormwater volume, but for any developer that is interested or a municipality that's interested in creating a palette of green infrastructure practices with which to incorporate into their code or to consider mandating for developers to select in a practice, or even where they're looking at the types of practices that could be out there to employ for a bicycle pedestrian project on a municipal level, this is a great resource for them to start out at. Let's take a look at a couple practices in the Capital District that you can actually go visit and see how they're performing. I don't know if people are familiar with, but this is Elbron Place. This is back in August of 2014. Elbron Place is a street in the Pine Hills neighborhood of Albany. It's actually a few blocks from where I live. On this particular date, the city of Albany got 4 inches of rain in 1 hour. An absolutely enormous storm. And this is not uncommon for storms. We're seeing the same number of events in a year, and we're seeing the same amount of precipitation, but storms are now becoming more localized, dumping more and more stormwater in smaller areas where they're likely to overwhelm the system. While the folks that live on the street, I just feel awful for them. The system was completely overwhelmed, and Elbron was completely flooded. And so the city of Albany was very quick to respond to this in developing a green infrastructure project in addition with some sewer separation. This particular project was on Quail Street. It's a vital corridor in the city of Albany, very dense, a number of residential and commercial operations. It's a transit route. There's a high number of students living in that neighborhood. And so the city really did a wonderful job of creating partnerships, not just between the water department, which is completely independent of the city, but the Department of General Services. They were very aggressive in getting grant funds for this particular project. And I'll talk about at the end, I'll summarize some of these grant projects that communities can rely on. But this particular project was quite substantial. We're talking almost a mile of linear feet for this corridor, obviously counting both sides of the street. Quite a wide street and wide sidewalk space, quite a big project. And urban soils are not traditionally well drained because of how compacted they are. In Albany, we have clay soils. So they had a lot of design considerations when putting this project together. They did a feasibility study, which is required for a number of the different grant programs that they were pursuing. But here on Quail Street, you can see the original plan was for these bump outs and these bioretention basins that they were planning on putting in. So the project was quite ambitious. And what happens quite frequently is a feasibility study will identify quite a substantial project, and then they'll begin to scale back based upon the amount of funding. So this was the construction cost estimate for this particular project was $2.6 million. It is important to note on this particular project, the city of Albany also did sewer separation. So this wasn't strictly a green infrastructure project, but they've disconnected a number of stormwater sewers and put them into Washington Park Lake with stormwater only. And then they were able to develop some practices to capture some of the garbage that would otherwise be discharged into that lake. So this is a more substantial project than what you actually see on the street. There was a number of things going on underground. And here we can see the calculations for water quality treatment. They calculated the water quality volume from the drainage area, and they can actually see how much volume per practice they were able to take away and manage from this particular practice. So quite a bit of stormwater would be able to be managed either by the disconnection or allowing it to infiltrate back into the ground. This is what we finally ended up with. You can see they eliminated the bump outs, which were the casualty of cost and some of the operational challenges in the city. But in this particular project, what the city elected to do was put in bioretention basins. It was not to put in the bioretention basins, but to put in tree pits and then put in porous pavement, which is a filter pave. I'll show you what that looks like. But it was quite a substantial project. One thing that was interesting to note about this particular project is the city had looked at this from a complete streets approach, and they knew that there were a number of other design elements that needed to be addressed in this particular corridor, namely sidewalks. And what was kind of a good thing about this particular project is in order to get the infiltration rates they needed to be able to create that void space, the city elected to, during construction, they elected to I'm just gonna go to these photos, to dig up a lot of the soil within the right-of-way and replace it with what's called structural soil, which has void space in it to be able to absorb the stormwater. And so they were actually traditionally in this grant program that they relied on, sidewalks are not an eligible expense. But in this case, they needed the void space from the structural soil, which was under the sidewalk, which necessitated them to pull up the sidewalks. So the city had to install new sidewalks as part of this project. And thankfully, the agency providing the grant support agreed. And so that was part of the project and that was incorporated in. Here you can see in the city strip in the center photo, they're laying down some of the pea gravel that's necessary to create that void space and be able to put what's called the filter pave back on top of it. This is a video of the ribbon cutting. One thing I did want to point out, I skipped past it. This is a terrible image. I apologize for the quality, but the city did a really great outreach effort, distributing flyers and these kind of what look like laminated menus to business owners. So they knew the construction timetable, they knew who to contact, they knew what the project was for. And they did a great job of communicating this to local businesses because construction's tough. You know, nobody likes dust or construction or loss of parking due to construction and noise. But the property owners and neighboring businesses were really happy with the outreach the city did on this particular project. And I think that that was important groundwork. At the end, when we did our kind of, this is what we do for green infrastructure projects. We don't do ribbon cutting, we do bucket pours. Some of the business said they had been asking the city for 20 plus years to put in new sidewalks, and now this day had finally arrived. But here we can see the bucket pour, and we're pouring the water into the porous pavement, into the flexi pave. This is outside of Mild Wally's, which is a great wing place that is no longer. But you can see that the commissioner of the water department there and some other local dignitaries pouring water into the ground and just watching it infiltrate. So these are fun projects, but it's really designed to get the stormwater off the sidewalk or off the roof leaders and get it to go back into the ground as where it's going to cause a potential overflow. So this particular project was $1.8 million. It was roughly, after the grants were applied, it was roughly $800,000. And the annual volume captured was 8.8 million gallons of stormwater, which is quite substantial. Lessons learned, this particular project, again, coupled with a stormwater separation project, was quite successful. Maintenance has been a challenge. The tree pits have not really been adopted by the neighbors. To some degree, you have folks putting in mulch. These practices are designed to look more wild, to have plants growing in them to soak up the stormwater, and that's just not happening. In some cases, they've been weed whacked down. In some cases, they've been covered over. So I think in retrospect, this particular corridor was such a high traffic corridor that a lot of the plants got trampled. It may have benefited more from engineered solutions or bioretention basins. Talk a little bit about Monument Square. This was a City of Troy project. Planning started in 2012 for this particular project, and they were originally going to resurface parking lanes and then put in some permeable pavement and install some stormwater lines. The project did change after they started getting into it and reducing some of the costs that were associated with some of the bids that came back. And so what they wound up doing was putting in, again, they put in tree wells, and they also put in what are called bioretention basins. I'll show those. And then they put in some porous pavement on the sidewalk. So this is the project limits. You can see here's the porous sidewalk that they installed. These are the new tree pits. And then there are new bioretention basins. And what does that look like on the ground? Well, we can see the bioretention basins kind of have little cuts from the curb, and the water goes into the bioretention basin. In the porous concrete, water can just flow right through it, just like it did with the porous asphalt. One of the advantages for these particular pieces of concrete is they're precast. So the city, if there's a problem, if it backs up, if they need to get to a piece of infrastructure underground, they can actually lift each of these pieces out of the ground and just pull them out and replace them or clean them. And it makes it really easy for them to manage this project. To date, I think this project has had a little bit more success in the adoption of the green infrastructure practices. I think that's because this is more of a destination area for the city. They have their farmers market there. There are a number of businesses that are out on the street, and I think they kind of see it as more of a beautification project that they're willing to adopt. So in this particular project, the lessons learned, I think, there's more of an adoption of the practices than on Wall Street. This project was about $500,000. They did get about $3.5 million in DEC WQIP grants, and it manages about 1 million gallons of stormwater every year, which is pretty important for the city of Troy. One of the more substantial projects we worked with was Route 32 in City of Watervliet. This was an entire corridor project, a highly visible corridor. The city had been looking at this particular corridor for a number of years and identified it in a number of different studies, including a water quality improvement grant program where they did an analysis of the entire corridor. And their goal was to reconstruct this whole street. And so they had applied to New York State DOT through the Transportation Improvement Program to do the street reconstruction. And as part of that project, they wanted to incorporate green infrastructure design practices into the street. But as you can see throughout the corridor, there are a number of different ways that the streetscape appears. You have some areas which are park and rather tree lined, some areas that don't have any sidewalks, where it's barren of trees or almost completely paved. So the city wanted a real comprehensive approach looking at the project. And the estimate for this project when it started was roughly $5 million. It's quite a big reach for the city. What they ultimately did was scale the project back into a much smaller project and looked at green infrastructure only when they weren't successful at getting the New York State DOT funds for the complete reconstruction. What they did was install bioretention basins with curb cuts, and then a rain garden and some tree pits as well. And I show these because as you're looking back through to be able to get a sense of what the actual infrastructure looks like under the ground, there's a significant amount of infrastructure just underneath what most people would see as just mulch and planters. In this case, they put in a stone layer for that absorption, and then they did put in an underdrain to make sure that this project didn't overflow back onto the sidewalk. Then they put in some decorative fence to protect it from people walking into. And that's something, a lesson learned on the Albany project. Those tree pits got kind of trampled. Well, Waterville didn't want this to happen in their bioretention basin, and they're slightly below grade, so they didn't want people to trip into them. So they put in some decorative fence. There's also curb inlets that are designed so it can accept stormwater flow off the street. This project was estimated to be $1 million. It did run over budget. I think the lesson learned on this particular project was it was bid out as a total package. It wasn't bid out with alternatives, and the city could have also bid it out as in kind of a menu approach. We'll buy this many bioretention basins or this many linear feet of porous asphalt for this price. And so it went over budget, which was somewhat of a little bit of a problem, but in essence, the project got done, and I think it's performing well. But the annual volume capture in this project is 1.3 million gallons. And that's important. That's 1.3 million gallons on an annual basis that would otherwise go out to the Hudson River. And this is what the project looked like. A couple of important design considerations. When I talked about these fences, one of the concerns the city had was when they were originally all fenced in, they were concerned about doors opening up into the fence. So they removed the fence on the street side. One small change to be able to manage expectations from the community. You can kind of see the curb inlets here. And they do collect some leaves, but those curb inlets allow stormwater to flow into the practice right off the street and avoid going into the combined sewer. They also put in a rain garden in the park to be able to absorb some stormwater flow from the streets. There's another picture of these practices. It has performed well. These projects do require a lot of maintenance though, and that is one consideration where when you do sewer separation, you bury everything. Yes, you need to jet the sewers from time to time and clean out your catch basins, but maintenance is an important consideration for a project like this because municipalities may not have staff on hand to be able to identify the right types of plantings and care for these types of projects. So maintenance is an important consideration for this type of project. Another lesson learned here, the city applied for a number of different funding sources. They weren't awarded in any of them. It was kind of a letdown because we thought it was a really dynamic project. So in this particular case, they had to go full freight. They weren't able to take advantage of some of those grants. There are other examples of local infrastructure projects that people can go out and see. The Urban Growth Center in Troy is a really great one because it incorporates a system-based approach. They have a green roof, they have a porous parking lot, they have a bioretention basin, they have a rainwater harvesting system, and it's completely private. So it's an interesting way to see how these systems work together. And their expectation for that project is there is not a drop of stormwater that falls on that site that goes into the combined sewer. So that is really interesting for an urban site with that amount of development to be able to manage all their stormwater. Another one here in the picture is where the rain barrel is and the pavers. That is at the Pine Bush. And so this particular project is more focused on water quality. So the Pine Bush certainly concerned about pollutants and perhaps urban heat island effect. So they're looking at practices that are more related to managing stormwater quality and then worrying about the volume because they have such great soils to drain in the Pine Bush, sandy soils. It's a really great site to incorporate green infrastructure practices. So who is the money? When we archive this presentation, you'll be able to click on each of these links and they open up each of these grant programs. The two major funders are the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation. They have a number of grants that fund green infrastructure. Each of those links goes to each of those grant programs, different matches and performance considerations that are associated with those grants. New York State DEC has a number of grants as well through the Water Quality Improvement Program, the estuary grants, more environmental justice impact grants, urban and community forestry grants, which are more focused on street trees. Different types of grants fund different types of things. For example, the Water Improvement Infrastructure Act grant programs more intended for quite large, substantial projects. When it comes to projects that are much smaller, they may be better suited for some of these other programs. But there are some flexible grant programs that communities have relied on. And one grant program I didn't mention in this list is the engineering planning grant. That's oftentimes the first time a community will implement their project. They'll look for an engineering planning grant in order to fund the feasibility, and that feasibility will be turned over to a state agency providing the funding for a particular project in order to demonstrate the effectiveness of a particular project. It's very important for communities to understand how the project is going to be maintained. Number one, if public money is being used for it, you want to make sure it's a long-lasting success. And number two, it's a project that has a high degree of public visibility. And so maintenance is absolutely critical to the success of the project and the likelihood a community will take on another green infrastructure project like that. I see some typos there. So there's my contact information. What I'll do is I'll make this presentation available to Jen so she can distribute it after the meeting. And if folks have any questions, I'm really happy to answer them, kind of talk through some of the projects or funding sources. I will say, CDRPC, here's my shameless plug. We are doing a webinar series starting October 1st, and we're running through December 30th. And we will have some representatives of the Environmental Facilities Corporation walking folks through their grant programs and some of the successful projects they funded from around the state. So if people have municipal contacts and they're interested in a green infrastructure project, it's a really great idea to say, hey, would you like to find a way to pay for that project? Here's a webinar where a state agency is talking about how they fund these particular projects. And I think that's a really good opportunity for them. I think I'm way over my time, so I apologize to Jen. Hopefully folks found this presentation engaging, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Martin. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. In the meantime, Martin, if you could make me the host.
Infrastructure joke.
Martin, can you make me the host?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
It's okay. So there are no questions about, I know Martin was very comprehensive.
I'll ask a quick question. Martin, great presentation. Thanks for all of that information. Do you normally see these applications for these projects come from the planning side, or is it from DPU, or is it like a hybrid of both?
It's usually a hybrid of both. I mean, when communities are strategically planning these initiatives, they're more likely to originate on the planning side. For example, Quail Street was a study that was originally in the planning realm. But when it comes to applying for some of these grants through New York State DEC or EFC, when it becomes more of I'll say a reality or more likelihood that they're going to green infrastructure or some sort of stormwater improvement is going to be incorporated into the project, they tend to transition into the public works side of things because of the necessity to do the detailed engineering or the stormwater work that's necessary as part of these projects. And it also depends on the sophistication of the community, right? I mean, Waterville, their city manager was the planning department and did a lot of the public works operations. So when Jeremy Smith was in that city, he was managing that project himself because he was basically the point person for a lot of projects. Albany is so sophisticated. They have an authority that manages stormwater for the city. So they were heavily involved in that project. So with different municipal sizes, there's different ways of doing it. But traditionally, it's you have to have your water department or your general services department involved because of the critical nature of managing the stormwater.
Right. A follow-up question: do you think that DPUs generally have like a healthier or helpful amount of data that would help influence decision making for like where these projects are most needed, or are there other resources that planners could use to find that information?
No, I think, given the fact that they have their stormwater program that has to be defined as part of their permit, they have an idea of where localized flooding may be. I mean, certainly from service calls, they know where the street floods. I mean, everybody in Gilsland knows the intersection of around Stuyvesant Plaza floods when we get rain. So they certainly know where these kind of hot spots or problem areas are. And through their stormwater program, they probably have a good idea of where these particular practices would benefit. The thing I think which is beneficial from a bike and pedestrian standpoint is using Quail Street as an example. If we have an idea that we need a corridor reconstructed or there are safety improvements that are needed, it's a good opportunity to incorporate some of these green infrastructure design elements into that process early on to be able to accomplish multiple goals. So yeah, Quail Street started out as, hey, we need to identify this corridor for public safety improvements or beautification improvements. And then the water department got involved and said, wait a minute, this is an entire area that is creating a flooding problem on Elbron. And we have our doors getting kicked in by residents who want something fixed to that. So you matched an opportunity with an emergency, and that's how a project was born into that particular project. So I think to answer your question, it does come from both worlds. I think, given good communication between those two entities, they can identify areas based upon either public need or some sort of operational challenge where they can implement the project.
Thanks.
Hey, Martin, this is Nate from Bethlehem. In terms of successful projects funded, is there a range of local match that we can expect?
It depends on the grant program. Some of the less lucrative programs from EFC will have 50% as their local match. Some of the New York DEC programs have as much as 85%. That percentage changes every year based upon the EPA guidelines and how they want to fund some of the grant programs. Generally, it's between 50 and 85% for these green infrastructure projects.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Looks like maybe that's the end of the question. So thank you, Martin. Like Martin said, we'll get the copy of the presentation out to everyone with the notes.
Yeah, and there's also, Jen, I'll send you a link to a really cool video the Adirondack Wildfire did where they have a kind of a 3-minute video about all their practices and how they work together. I think people might find that pretty engaging.
Okay, cool. Thanks. All right. Can everyone see my screen now? Yes. Okay. So getting back into our agenda and some of the updates here at Cdtc. Oh boy. Hold on one moment. Okay. Cdtc has developed a Open Streets resource page that you can link to from the COVID-19 resource page and other parts of the website. Our in-person meetings are still canceled. We don't have a date. We are just waiting until we feel people feel comfortable and it's safe to do so. So if you need to reach staff, the fastest way to get a response is still email, but you can call the office. We will return your call eventually, but staff is not in the office every day. So just as a heads up if you're looking for information. As part of the Open Streets resources, we've linked to information on, depending on what kind of, if you live in a town, city, village, and what kind of road that town, city, or village is looking at, perhaps closing or modifying. There's information on what kinds of permits you might use or what kinds of designs and what kind of process you should consider when implementing an open street or slow street or play street program. We do not have updated traffic data past July 13th. Streetlight is no longer making it available to us for free. So, but we are still monitoring, traffic. And while traffic did seem to be rebounding, it does seem like the trips, commute trips versus non-commute trips are kind of shifting, and more of the traffic are non-commute trips, and they're kind of throughout the day instead of two big peak hour spikes. So we'll continue to watch that. Also, we have been doing some spot checks for counts for bike ped and trails, and this is just a little snapshot of some change in trail use since COVID. So we recently did a count on the Zim Smith Trail. We did a count at Coons Crossing, which is the new part of the trail. And then we did one at Goldfoot Road in Round Lake, I believe. And as you can see, use is significantly higher, and the county had been hearing from users that the trail had been crowded, that there had been a lot of users. They had been out and seen it was crowded, so they had, wanted to collect some data. So they were correct. Use has skyrocketed. And then an interesting comparison would be the Albany Shaker Trail that is near the airport in Albany. Since most people are working from home, and that trail is majority pedestrians who use it at lunch hour and work in that British American development, trail use is way down. So just kind of two examples of shifts in use, and we'll continue to do some spot checks throughout the region. If you are interested in helping out doing a count, let me know. I will give you the count sheets, and I'd be happy to assist you. So New Visions 2050 updates. Last Thursday, New Visions 2050 was adopted by our policy board. We have updated the New Visions 2050 website so that the page, it's no longer a New Visions and then a New Visions 2050 update page. It's just one page. It has all of the information about the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It explains what it is, why we do it, how we're going to implement it. And then it has all of the different components of the plan, the summary, the chapters, and they're all in like accordion drop-down menus, similar to the Bike Ped Advisory Committee's meeting page. So you can go through and look at all the different chapters still, or standalone documents. For implementation, we are launching a New Visions learning series. So we will start scheduling presentations for town boards, city councils, zoning and planning boards. Of course, virtual presentations, and we're going to try and get feedback from folks on what kind of tools, whether it's a checklist or some sort of resource to help them implement the New Visions plan and the ideas and principles that are within it. We're also doing some webinars that will be geared towards our members, so the local governments, but the public will be invited to participate if they'd like to. Our first webinar is on September 22nd. And the topic is going to focus on smart communities, so leveraging technology to modernize the region's transportation system. We'll talk about a range of technologies and also discuss our recent solicitation for new smart communities projects. So if you have any questions about New Visions, definitely let me know. I did go over the summary of public feedback last meeting, but there is a summary document and all sorts of other materials on the website. The Smart Communities solicitation is currently out. Cdtc has made $75,000 available to assist communities in doing smart cities types of projects. So projects that leverage technology or use data to improve traffic operations, safety. Our last project that we funded was in Saratoga Springs, and we developed an LED streetlight guidebook, which may not sound, super transportation related, but we looked at how LED technologies can be used to improve traffic safety, particularly pedestrian safety, and also what kind of other technologies can be integrated into the new LED streetlights to further improve the transportation system. So whether it was streetlights that can also that you could install EV charging on, or that you can install cameras or sensors that help either collect data that helps with operations, or like streetlights that communicate and stuff like that. So the proposals are due Friday, October 2nd, and information on the solicitation can be found on our website. And again, we will discuss some of the details and be able to answer questions about it on our September 22nd webinar. Some other opportunities that are currently out there, we're still accepting applications for the Cdtc CDRPC Technical Assistance Program. These are all being accepted on a rolling basis. The trail feasibility study, we have evaluated and prioritized the proposals, and we are working on notifying all of the sponsors, but we did receive 5 proposals requesting over $300,000. So there's definitely a lot of interest and in implementing the trails plan, and there's a lot of projects that are very close to being able to be implemented. They just kind of need a little bit of planning assistance to get to that point. So that was good to see, and we'll be in touch with those project sponsors very soon. Complete Streets Workshop, I believe we still have room for one more workshop, and this is also a rolling acceptance. So if you have any questions, please let me know, or you can get in touch with Chris Bauer or Carrie Ward on our staff. Similarly, the ADA transition plans, this is also rolling acceptance. So let us know if you are interested or have questions. Linkage status, we have several ongoing linkage projects and a bunch of new linkage projects. So the City of Albany's bicycle and pedestrian master plan is ongoing. They are currently selecting and planning for some demonstration sites. The Ballston Spa pedestrian bicycle master plan, REI was released, so consultants are submitting proposals for that. The Hoosick Hillside study, they are right now planning for and conducting public outreach. The Village of Manan's land use plan is, the REI is in development. And then the Scotia Downtown Connections Plan, that's also in development. So other projects that are going on that are not linkage, but Cdtc is supporting and these are part of the CDRPC Cdtc Technical Assistance Program, is the assistance to the town of Glenville on the Route 50 zoning code, town of Westerlo comp plan, and the town of East Greenbush Gilligan Road complete streets enhancements. And then the town of Clifton Park development and conservation trends analysis. Other CDTC planning initiatives, we just talked about New Visions 2050. We are working with CDTA to initiate a bus lane feasibility study. So this will be looking at some locations throughout the region to see where it may be feasible to dedicate one lane on a road to a bus only lane. So that would significantly improve like bus rapid transit and other bus services in the region. The local bridge preservation study, so that's evaluating the structural integrity of bridges and prioritizing bridges for preservation funding. We're also doing a freight study on New York 7 with the town of Rotterdam and Princetown. Also, we've been coordinating with DOT to look at the route 378 bridge, DOT is evaluating the replacement or relocation of that bridge. So there is an RFP out on that. That is going to be a pretty significant study to see what the future options are for that bridge. Cdtc did provide feedback on the development of the scope for that project, and we requested a lot of incorporation of bicycle and pedestrian accommodation. So that is definitely reflected in the RFP. And then we mentioned the ADA program. Currently, we're working with the city of Saratoga Springs and the town of in the town of Glenville, but we are still accepting applications for that. Capital Coexist mini grants. If you have a mini grant and you have not done your project yet, you still have time to either rescope or you can delay till next year. You just need to let me know and we will work with you. Some projects are moving ahead, but a lot of projects have been slightly changed. So hopefully we will have more information on that in the next couple of months. CDPHP cycle update. I think Lindsay is on. Lindsay, do you have any info on CDPHP cycle that you want to share? Lindsay, did you want to present some updates?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my microphone to hook up.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. It's very finicky.
We can hear you, so that's a good thing.
Okay, that's a start. Yeah, we are having a huge season despite our late start. Ridership is we're averaging the same amount of weekly rides that we were at this point last year. We have we have 300 bikes on the road at this point. And Albany still has the highest ridership like they normally do. But one thing that we started new this year is SUNY Albany has joined our bike share program as an access partner. So those students have really taken very quickly to the bike share program. So we're trying to work with a lot of their offices and departments on just proper usage for the students because it's new for them. So just kind of teaching them how to take care of the bikes and make sure everything is locked up. But they're all over campus. They're in and out of campus with the bikes. So that's been exciting to see. But overall, we're doing well. The operations team is doing a very good job keeping up with our cleaning and sanitation program that we put in place before we launched this season. And we have an additional set of bikes that we currently have in a paint shop right now that we're going to be adding to our system starting towards the end of this month and beginning of October. So our fleet of 340 bikes will be growing quickly. So that's where we're at right now. We're, like I said, we're having a great season. Obviously, when everything was getting going in June when we first launched, we weren't sure how it was going to go. We weren't sure what our ridership was going to be, if our members were, going to feel safe on our bikes. But Jen, to your point about trail usage, we've seen a ton down by the river, has been very popular. The racks down there are full and empty all day long with bikes coming and going. Anytime we look at the map, you can see numerous bikes riding up and down that bike trail down there. So that's been great. Plus with the new South End connector, it's been a great option for people. And I think they're really taking advantage of, the point that bike riding is a safe activity to do. It's good mentally and physically. So that's helped our ridership too. But, everything has been great on our end so far. But just to reiterate that our operations team has been doing a phenomenal job of keeping up with a very tall task that we put on them. So yeah, that's where we're at. If anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me. But yeah, we're hoping to get some new bikes. So you might see the bikes function the same way, but the frames of them look a little bit different. So you'll see some of those coming out in the next month or two that we're very excited to add to our fleet.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. I know We've seen them. We've seen lots of CDPHP bikes around up and down Madison Avenue, and even down our street towards the hospital and that area. So, and even like during lunchtime. So,
Yeah.
it's been good to see. So,
Yep.
awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. So if anyone has any updates that they'd like to share, please feel free to unmute and give us an update on either something you're working on or something that's coming up that you'd like the advisory committee to know about. I know people are doing work on projects. Does anyone have any questions about tasks or projects that are ongoing at Cdtc?
Jen, it's Jen Hogan. How are you?
Good. How are you, Jen?
Good, thanks. Just a quick update on the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. And typically, as you all are aware, we have our June push with our enforcement corridors and our focus communities, as well as education coupled with it. Obviously, June did not happen. NHTSA has shifted all their campaigns. So it looks like October is now going to be at the national level designated as Pedestrian Safety Month. So we are looking to continue our efforts and work with the DOT in promoting our visibility PSA again during daylight saving time. And I think we're working with GTSC to promote, again, education in those focus communities. So we are moving forward in that planning process.
Great. And we are also at CDC going to do one of our New Visions Learning Series webinars in October and focus on pedestrian safety to be consistent with that theme. So, and related to that, I know we haven't announced anything for, usually we do a walk to school type of promotion or event. With kind of the uncertainty and around school, we've held off on announcing anything, but we are in the process of developing just some resources for schools on, promoting, encouraging walking and bicycling to school. And we will link to the NACDO. They have I forget what it's called right now. I think it's just Slow Streets, but it's for schools, like Streets for Pandemic Response for Schools. So there's some design guidance specifically for schools there, and we're gonna try and promote that because as we've been looking at some of the return to school plans and the transportation plans, we definitely recognize that transportation may be an issue as a lot more parents are dropping off and picking up, and it could be chaotic. So hopefully we'll be able to provide some assistance there. And if anyone has any questions or is working with the school that is interested in doing something like alternative drop-off areas with, some safe routes to school routes, definitely get in touch and we'd be happy to talk to them.
So, Jen, hello, good morning. CPMAC has, as we told you, submitted some proposals to Shen. And one question that's in our minds now, because Shen has almost no bike racks, is there a place where we can recommend they go for grants for bike racks and bike corrals?
That is a good question. I don't know of current funding, but I can look into it and get back to you. I know that a couple of schools in the area have gotten grants through not CDC, but other sources for bike racks. So I'll look into that and I'll get in touch with you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else?
Yeah, Jen, this is John Gillivan,
John.
bike pedestrian advocate. I've been riding, more of the bike trails than I normally would ride. But one thing I've observed, and I'm sure other people have seen the same thing, is that I think there needs to be more education about the use of bike helmets. I was just on the Zen Smith Trail yesterday. Started at Round Lake, Leah's Bakery, and headed south to Mechanicville, 6 miles. And over that one stretch, I must have seen 95% of the people riding the bike without a helmet. And what's really scary is that the majority of the people are middle-aged or older. It's not the young people. It's not the young families. It's typically your older adults. A lot of these people are more leisure riders. So I understand I'm trying to understand where they're coming from, but I think there should be like a safety pop-up on Zen Smith this fall and just tell people, look, these are the repercussions if you don't wear a helmet. Here's some helmets. If you don't want to buy a helmet, we're going to provide you helmets. I'm looking at kids in my neighborhood that don't have helmets. I say, if you don't have a helmet, go down to the Village of Colony hall and grab a helmet. They're available. I've got helmets left over from the last couple of years. We've had these pop-up events, but to me, it's very irritating. And I know serious cyclists that ride thousands and thousands of miles, not leisure miles like some of these people I'm recognizing. And they've fallen with their helmet and saved their life. Mm-hmm. And that kind of sticks in my mind as well. So I just want to, I don't know, I'm not sure who the right people are. Round Lake is Saratoga County. By the way, what's interesting, yesterday morning, Saratoga Sheriff car was sitting in the parking lot next to Leah's. And on the bike path, we ran across 2 sheriffs on bikes, which was encouraging, I guess. I'm not sure, I didn't hear them, I went by them, but I didn't see how they're interacting with people, if they're trying to tell people to stay right or how to pass safely. But in any event, I think there's a lot of people using the bike pass for the first time, or haven't been on a bike in a while, that really don't understand the proper etiquette and also the proper use of a helmet. So I just want to make that point.
Thanks, John. We've definitely gotten some comments from people about trail etiquette with the increase in use and some new trail users out, and how we can, promote good trail use behaviors. So that's definitely something that, we've been looking at. The bike helmet, I'm always entertained when I see families riding and the kids all have helmets and the adults don't, which modeling really bad behavior. But we've seen a lot of groups do helmet giveaways and they're always really popular. I'm not familiar with any group doing helmet giveaways this year, but it's something for us to keep in mind and to encourage different groups to do, because I know some groups are looking to do safety education and different initiatives, but sometimes are unsure what to do,
Yep.
So that's good to know. Thanks, John.
Yep.
All right, if we don't have any other updates, our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 13th. We will be doing Zoom again, unless otherwise announced, but I would assume it's going to be a Zoom. So I will be in touch with the registration information and an agenda. So it was good to see you all again. And I will see you again next month. And thank you again, Marion.
Thank you.
Bye, Dan.
Thank you both.
Thanks for the opportunity to present. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe,
Bye.
everyone.